So throughout my entire life, I have had ADHD, and this has caused me to talk to myself in just the most, I want to say, random situations. As I go throughout life, as I see things, as I read things, I've always talked to myself. But there's a specific reason I've done this. It's not because I'm schizophrenic and I don't hear voices in my head. There's no demons telling me to do things. I talk to myself in the sense that it really does help help me remember things. It helps me remember things that I've seen, helps me remember things that I've read. It really does help me retain a lot of information. See, I have read countless books, and one of the biggest struggles I've ever had with reading and with studying was I always could not retain information correctly. I remember when I first started reading, I would start to read a book, and I would open up the book, I would read a chapter, and I just wouldn't be able to remember it. I'd say, for example, I would read the chapter, I'd close the book, and immediately the information was just gone. So I could reread the chapter, close it again, it was just gone. Like if you quizzed me 5 minutes later on what you just read, I wouldn't be able to answer it. So this led to a lot of frustration when trying to read and trying to study anything for like school or for even just personal study of whatever you want to study. So this made it very difficult to actually study and retain information. And if you have ADHD, you likely are facing the same scenario where if you're, say, for example, studying for a school exam, or say, for example, you're reading a book, or say, for example, you're trying to study for a project, whatever it might be, whatever you might be in a situation where you have to obtain and retain knowledge. If you have ADHD like myself, you might have troubles remembering. So I started to talk to myself after I read the book. And like I said, not because I was crazy or like I had voices in my head, because I really found that it helped out with being able to retain a lot of the information. Because for me, it was like I was educating myself. It was like I closed the book. Let's say, for example, I was a professor and I closed the book and I had 100 students in front of me. I now know the knowledge. The best way for me to retain it was to teach myself. I would pretend that there'd be somebody in front of me or myself in front of me, and I'd be like, hey, this is what I learned. Let's go over it one-on-one. So I think the best way, if you're having troubles reading or even studying anything, whether it's for an exam, a school project, or even just books, and you want to retain the information, and you're trying to improve yourself using books, you need to talk to yourself. You need to have a conversation with yourself. And I know it may sound crazy, and you may not be used to this, but like I said, the problem with ADHD is our brains work very quickly, and our brains tend to throw away knowledge that we don't really perceive as very important. So when you read a book, or when you study or read anything, pretty much, our brains tend to absorb the knowledge and then just throw it away immediately. And that's just part of ADHD. It's part of how our brains work. Brains are very hyperactive, jumping all over the place. We don't really like to stick to one thing at a time. So the best way is to actually have a conversation with yourself and study with yourself. Because here's the thing, what you'll do is when you start to study, or when you start to talk to yourself about what you just studied, you'll retain the information a lot better. Because not only are you basically essentially pretend it's like you're looking in a mirror and you're educating yourself. So not only are you going over the literature that you just read, you're also going over in your brain over and over again and kind of cementing it as something that is extremely important. So if you're studying for like an exam and you want to really ace that exam, you want to cement that in your brain as it's very important. Because here's another thing with ADHD. Like I said, we tend to throw a lot of information away, and a lot of information we don't perceive as important. So once again, I remember I told you I would read one chapter and immediately it would just be gone. So when I started to actually have these conversations with myself and basically started to talk to myself like I was crazy, I really found that it retained a lot of the information. It allowed me to to close the book of whatever chapter I was reading, and I would be able to be like, yeah, that's exactly what I wrote. This is what the author said, and this is the lesson that was taught. So the bottom line is this. As somebody with ADHD, you need to start cementing in your brain what's important. You need to find out what's important. The best way to figure out what's important is to go over it with yourself through repetition, talk back and forth, like literally talk to yourself. Pretend there's somebody in front of you and talk to yourself. When you start to have these conversations with yourself, you will notice that you will retain information better. So go give it a try. I guarantee you won't be disappointed. It's advice that'll help you work, especially if you have ADHD.